Hello. So I've read a few books over the past month or two. I haven't had a reading update in a while, and I have another book that I just finished, but I have to save it for another video. So without too much rambling, the first book is Daniel Dennett's Freedom Evolves. I really like this book. I thought it was going to be a lot like his book, The Elbow Room, where he makes an argument for varieties of free will that are worth wanting, he says. But in this book, he does that a little bit. There's, I think, one or two chapters where he argues for varieties of free will worth wanting. But he also talks about some of the presuppositions that go into the notion of determinism that shouldn't be entailed necessarily. So, for example, the concept of inevitability isn't entailed by determinism. You could have a fixed set of laws, and those fixed set of laws could only have a probability of reaching, let's say, state C. But that doesn't mean that it will inevitably reach state C, especially because you can make the argument that we don't have infinite amounts of time, and we couldn't possibly reach every permutation of the states of the universe. So, yeah, there's a lot of presuppositions that go into the notion of determinism, and he calls those out inside this book. I enjoyed this book quite a bit. The next book is Debt. So I did a book review of this, and I made a post about it on Instagram, and what I said then and what I'll say now is that the book is excessively political. And what that doesn't mean, however, that I don't agree with the author's points. Somebody took this to mean that I don't agree with the author's points. I do agree that it is political, and I do agree that people have neglected the political side of debt. But with a title like Debt, the First 5,000 Years, I was expecting something a little bit more general than just an anthropology of debt, which, yes, anthropology is a general field. I accept that. However, I think there are other elements of debt outside of anthropology that could have been baked into a title like Debt, the First 5,000 Years. For example, mathematical descriptions of debt instruments, or different types of debt instruments, or even different things that were brought about inside society as a result of debt. He does do that in one part of the book where he talks about the primordial loan, like the original loan given to the kings. He says, for example, markets could only exist because debt was created. And the way it happened was wealthy lords would give a loan to a king, and that king would raise an army. The army would go and gather gold, and then the king would pay an interest rate and pay some sort of soldiers, and then the soldiers would go and spend the money amongst the peasantry and create markets, right? And that cycle began after the original loan was given, and the original loan can never be paid back. And so that he's kind of arguing that markets only exist as a result of debt. That's an interesting argument, right? But he doesn't do that for 99% of the book. And even that part of the book is very short. Basically, this book is just like the morality of debt and talking about the political nature of debt, almost to a point of redundancy because he repeats himself a lot inside the book. I would say this book is like a 6 out of 10, by the way. It's way more hyped than it is solid. This next book is the Warren Buffett Portfolio. This might be one of the last books I read. This is a terrific book. So this book is basically, it's a 2-volume series kind of. There's the Warren Buffett Investment, I think it's called, or something like that, and then the Warren Buffett Portfolio. And the Warren Buffett Portfolio focuses on portfolio theory and argues a lot against modern portfolio theory. This book favors what's called like focus investing, focus investing, I think it's called, where you only pick anywhere between, I think it's 10 to 15 companies, and you focus on just those 10 to 15 companies because those are really solid companies. And he did an interesting study inside this book where he found that portfolios that had, say, 250 stocks, portfolios that had 100 stocks, and portfolios that had anywhere between 30 and 60 stocks performed the same as portfolios that had 15 stocks. The difference being, though, is in the maximum and minimum. And he said what he found was in the minimum, portfolios that have 15 stocks or approximately have an 8% gain. That's their worst year. And then their maximum is about a 23% gain. That's their best year. Whereas compared to, let's say, a portfolio that has 250 stocks, the maximum was, I think, like 18%, and the minimum, I think, was about like 10%. And he also noted that all the portfolios average out to be about 15% a year, or like 14 point something percent a year. So I really like this book because for me, the study itself speaks volumes, but for me, managing 15 stocks is much more doable, especially because I'm not a massive corporation, than say 250 stocks. So for that reason, I really like this book, and it really changed the way I approach portfolio theory. I have the other book, the investment one that he has as well, he wrote, which will hopefully change the way I do actual investing, not just portfolio management. I really recommend that book. The next one is Bertrand Russell's Human Society and Ethics in Politics. This book, so this book was, if you're not familiar with philosophy, this is probably a good book for you, right? It will tell you how philosophy can influence society. But if you're very familiar with philosophy, especially like naive realism or just classical like Greek philosophy, this book will be redundant and none of the arguments will come off as persuasive to you, because if you look at the reviews of the book, a lot of the critiques say that it's just common sense. And that is true. And maybe in his time period, that was less commonsensical, some of the arguments he's making. But if you're not familiar with philosophy, you'll get a lot from this book. That's all I'll say about that. And if you are, you probably don't want to read this book, right? He just talks about like what is good and bad, what are the roles that ethics should play inside politics, how do moral obligations shape cultural norms, things like this, right? It's pretty low-hanging if you're familiar with philosophy already. This next one, Ghost Wars. It's about like the CIA, Afghanistan, and I believe even Russia a little bit, also Bin Laden. And it's basically like the CIA's policy inside Afghanistan from, I think it was 2001 onward. I don't know what time period it ended. I think it was Soviet invasion of 2001. And I would say that this book, you have to be careful with reading it because a lot of the reports aren't like quantitative reports. They're interviews with soldiers who were in Afghanistan or diplomats who were at an embassy around Afghanistan. They're in Pakistan, right? So you have to be careful in that sense. And I do have the impression that a lot of the grittier stuff was left out of this book. Maybe because the CIA does hassle people who publish things about their books. There's no shortage of authors who have been hassled by the CIA. So maybe he left that out on purpose. I don't know. But I would say overall, the narrative of the book wasn't too biased. It critiqued America a lot. It critiqued Pakistan a lot. It critiqued Afghanistan a lot. It even critiqued Russia a lot. One of the things that I walk away with from this book is the Stinger program that happened in Afghanistan. The CIA handed out, I think it was billions of dollars in ground-to-air missiles, like shoulder-fired missile systems, and they spent the equivalent amount for distribution and recovery. So after the Russians had pulled out of Afghanistan, they wanted to recover the Stinger missiles because it made it unsafe, the airspace above. And they spent about $3 billion trying to recover those. I think it was like, was it 500 or 2,000 Stinger missiles they distributed in Afghanistan? And so it really beats home the idea that intelligence agencies kind of have a plan, they do something, they blunder, and then they spend their entire time afterwards fixing their blunder. That's probably a lot truer than we realize, that many of them are just fixing blunders that they've caused rather than following their original plan. I'd say it's worth a read if you're interested in Afghanistan, but you can pretty much skip this book if you have no interest in Afghanistan. This next book, The Greatest Trade Ever, was not like too technical, and it's not riddled with like technical concepts or mathematical notation. It's more like a general audience finance book that gives you like a narrative account of the kind of trades that were made during the 2007, 2006 time period, right before the 2008 financial crash. And it explains some of the logic behind it. One of the things that I did walk away with from this book was how important it is to check asset to equity ratios all the time. I knew it was, I kind of tangentially knew it was important beforehand, but the fact that somebody in 2007 used that ratio to predict a financial collapse, such a simple ratio, really made that ratio important for me. I would say it's a good book to read if you just want like an easy read in finance, but you're not going to walk away with too much technical knowledge from this. It might just put you in the headspace for finance. This book, I'm not going to talk about it. It's General Principles of Turkish Law. It is terribly written and there's grammatical mistakes all over the place. If you're interested in Turkish law, don't pick that book up. Sigmund Freud, The Psychology of Love. So this is Freud's theories of sex. The book is mistitled. This has very little to do with love, and it's all about his theories of sex. And while I knew his theories were like really funny beforehand, because I'm familiar with psychology, but now that I've directly read the primary sources for his theories of sex, these are hilarious, very funny, like meme potential. Some of the stuff is correct, or like he seems to be going in the right direction. So for example, some people have like motivated hysteria, right? They look for things in the environment that could reasonably trigger their hysteria, and because they want to be hysteric. So you could say it's like a motivated mental health problem. That stuff's probably true. But the other stuff, man, I couldn't tell you. Like, I get in trouble from YouTube talking about it. So it's only worth, that book is only worth to read if you want to read Freud. Okay, George Bataille, Eroticism. This is a great book. I don't agree with most of the stuff he said, but what he did say was so interesting that I think everybody should read this book. I can't say too much because of the content of the book, but it was a very fun read. It's not a book that you'll walk away. It's one of these books that you read simply for the sake of reading the book. The reading the book is the experience itself. Whereas like if you read a finance textbook, you're looking to get something out of it. This was, it's like the end in itself. And whereas like a finance book was a means to an end, I would highly recommend reading this. Yeah, this is a very fun book. Definitely in the top 20 books I've ever read. I don't know if it hits the top 10. Only time will tell. But yeah, I recommend this book. So those are all the books I recently read. If you want me to read some books that you find interesting or that you want me to talk about, let me know below. I have 4 books I'm reading right now, but I should be able to finish them in the next month. And with that being said, bye-bye.